President Trump facing allegations that his lawyer paid off a porn star right before the 2016 election in exchange for her silence about their extramarital affair. So, why are prominent evangelical leaders giving the president a pass?
Evangelicals, conservatives gave him a mulligan. They let him have a do-over. They said, we'll start afresh with you and we'll give you a second chance.
That was a long time ago. I'm more interested, Don, in who a person is today and then what they were 11 years ago. And I believe that he's a changed person.
Joining us now to discuss this are CNN political commentators Ben Ferguson and Tara Setmeyer. Ben, let me start with you. Good morning. Help us understand this. Does everyone get a mulligan on adultery from evangelicals or just Donald Trump?
No, I don't think everyone gets a mulligan. I don't think the majority of voters that voted for Donald Trump call it a mulligan in the way that some have said it. I think this is a serious issue, and a lot of people also knew when they were voting for Donald Trump, they were voting for an individual not based on what he was coming out there and saying that he was as a big evangelical Christian. They knew Donald Trump had a tough past. They knew that he had things in the past that they wouldn't agree with, maybe when it comes to moral issues. They voted for him on political issues and the climate today, and they were willing to say, I know this is not a guy walking out on stage claiming to be a hardcore evangelical Christian like George Bush did in 2004.
Yeah, I get it. And my issue isn't really with Donald Trump's imperfections or even his voters. It's with these evangelical leaders. I mean, what part of the seventh commandment does it say thou shalt not commit adultery unless you're going to run for president someday as a Republican?
Look, I think many of these evangelical leaders, they have to remember what their job is first. It's not politics, right? If you're a pastor, your job is to be that pastor, and you have to stay consistent with what you're saying about this. I do also believe very much in forgiveness, and you can clearly hear that from Billy Graham, the comments that you've had from Franklin Graham, I should say, and you can hear that from Tony. Yeah, from Tony Perkins. Look, and I think it has to be across the board. That's something that's clear. But
so, just to be clear, so you see an inconsistency and hypocrisy here.
I see an inconsistency. If you're a pastor,
why not?
I've always said this. Well, let me finish my point about pastors. I think pastors' jobs, first and foremost, are to be pastors and not be in politics.
Yeah.
When you start meddling in between here, you're going to have to start changing lines and narratives here to make things fit when you support or back a candidate. That's also the reason why I don't like evangelicals to come out and support candidates.
Okay, so Tara, here's what's confusing. It is that Tony Perkins said something very different in 2007 when it involved John Edwards having an adulterous affair. Here's what he said then. When it comes to presidents in particular, social conservatives think that character is an issue. And as Harry Truman once said, a man that will lie to his wife will lie to me, and a man that will break his marriage oath will break his oath of office. Why does he feel differently now?
I don't know what happened to that, Tony Perkins. You know what? What's happened is exactly to Ben's point that these pastors and these men who are called to be leaders, their leadership should be to their flock first and to biblical principles. And as Christians, we're supposed to be the lights of the world. And I don't understand how any of this is furthering the message that the Christian church is called to do, which is supposed to be converting lives to Christ. How is this? They're not setting that example by being hypocrites, which is what Ben wouldn't say, but I'll say it. These evangelical leaders are hypocrites, evidenced based even just on what you just read just there, on what Tony Perkins said. So Trump gets a mulligan because he's doing what we want him to do now. So they're putting policy over Christian biblical principles. I don't see how God is pleased with that.
Yeah, which Christian biblical principle was it, Ben, that where Christ first referred to the mulligan, do you think?
Look, I don't think it's there. I do know that Christ talks an awful lot about forgiveness, and I think that's where Tony Perkins.
Agreed.
And they talk about repentance also, and I would like to know Billy Graham's reference, Franklin Graham's reference. I'm sorry, about that Trump is a changed man. In what respect? He's never asked for forgiveness.
Tara,
he's never asked for. He's never engaged in repentance. That's where it comes in. You repent and then you change your behavior. What has Trump done to change his behavior? Nothing. People are making excuses here.
I'm not defending the behavior. Let's be clear. I'm not defending the behavior. I said this at the beginning. I'll say it again. This is the problem I have with evangelical pastors and others who
I know,
get
but I get
hardcore
it, but
into
they do
politics,
weigh in on
because
politics.
Then
I
you
get
have
it.
to
You don't
walk,
want them
then
to,
you
but
have
they
to walk
do.
down these comments.
Yeah, they
Right,
do
but
weigh
my
in on
thing is
politics. And so why don't you want to call
it's
that
one thing to weigh in.
hypocritical?
Hold on. There's one thing to weigh in on a moral issue or an issue that deals with politics. Abortion is a great example of that, right? I have no problem with a pastor talking about that issue. But if you're going to come out and use the word mulligan on an individual because either A, you're close to him, or B, because you backed him and you don't want to embarrass yourself per se, that's where it becomes a real problem, and you lose that moral high ground and footing, because a pastor's job is not to be a politician. Yeah. That's not his job.
And also to have some consistency. Right. If you believe in these ideals, if you don't believe that let me just read to you the Family Research Council's mission statement, okay? So their mission statement is to promote marriage and family as the foundation of civilization. And so, does he think that it helps marriage to have an affair with a porn star or not?
I think you'd have to ask him that, and clearly he would say, of course not. What I do know is that a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump, and there's... Well, I don't know. Again, I'm not going to speak for him.
He spoke for himself, Ben. He said that he used the term mulligan, which, okay, if you want to, even if you wanted to accept that as a one-off, maybe. But this is a consistent pattern of behavior for Donald Trump, and it's not just the adulterous behavior that he's exhibited his entire life, but his other immorality, his way that he speaks about people, the way that he denigrates, groups of people, the way that he attacks the media and institutions in our country. I mean, Donald Trump's character deficit is something that the evangelical church should never have tolerated, just because he gives them a few bones by saying that he's going to be pro-life and have religious freedom. You cannot put this kind of policy gains over biblical Christian principle. Quickly. That right there is the same, what does it gain a man, to inherit the world and lose his soul? That's exactly what's happening right now in the evangelical community.
Quickly, one last thing. It does, if there's one person who seems to be upset by it, I mean, this is only by appearances, it's Melania. She canceled a trip to Davos today with her husband, and it was their 13th wedding anniversary on Monday night, and we didn't see them celebrating. Maybe they did, but that was the day that she announced that she wasn't going to be going to Davos.
She knew what she was marrying.
There you go. Tara, Ben, thank you for the debate.
Thanks.
Anytime.
We're following a lot of news. Let's get right to it.
If they really are trying to interview the president, that is very good news for the president, because it means they are starting to wrap up.
We're going to be fully cooperative with the special counsel.
The Attorney General and James Comey, they have both been interviewed by the special counsel's office.
I'm not at all concerned. It is not appropriate for the President of the United States to ask a federal official who they voted for.
He doesn't understand the separation of powers.
Are you concerned about the senior leadership of the FBI? Thanks, everyone.
Let's see how it all works out.
These people hostile to the president have not been conducting themselves in a manner that befits the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
This is all part of trying to save this president's bacon by damaging the FBI and the Department of Justice.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camarada.
Beautiful sunrise there. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new day. It is Wednesday, January 24th, 8 o'clock in the East. Big developments in the Russia investigation, all in just one day. Sources tell CNN that Robert Mueller wants to interview President Trump to question him about the decision to fire former FBI Director James Comey and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Another sign the Mueller probe is ratcheting up and perhaps somehow closing in on the president. The special counsel questioned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for hours, we're told, last week. We also have exclusive reporting about a former Trump associate who may be thinking about cooperating with the special counsel.
The Washington Post is reporting shortly after President Trump fired Comey, he asked acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe to come to the White House, and then he asked him whom he voted for in the 2016 election. That was in an Oval Office meeting. He then berated McCabe for donations that his wife had taken from Terry McAuliffe, a Democrat, and his organization. McCabe told the president he did not vote, which is not unusual in that community. But he also said he found the conversation disturbing.
All right, joining us now is the reporter who broke that story. We have CNN political analyst and White House reporter for the Washington Post, Josh Dawsey. Hi, Josh.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Let's start with the question that President Trump put to Andrew McCabe, which was it as simple as who did you vote for in 2016?
Right. Well, it was a get-to-know-you meeting. It was right after he had pushed FBI Director James Comey out. He was thinking about making McCabe acting director. McCabe was acting director. And it was clear that he was looking for loyalty. He wanted to know, who did you vote for? He berated him over his wife's taking political contributions from a Clinton supporter, and made clear to Mr. McCabe, I want to know what your political leanings and affiliations are. And the people around me have told me that they are Democratic, and I don't really like the sound of that.
Okay, so was he that explicit? So did he say, I want to know what your political leanings are?
I mean, he said, who did you vote for in the election? I think that's a pretty, specific question. He wanted to know, did you support the Democrat? Did you support me? Did you support Clinton? Did you support me?
Okay, because the reason I ask, and I press on this, is because you see it, or he saw it, I guess, as a loyalty test. Lots of people do. But we just had the RNC chair in, Ron McDaniel, who said he's just making conversation. That was just a get-to-know-you meeting that he had with Andrew McCabe, and that's how the president makes conversation.
Well, I heard her say that. It's just unusual, our sources and experts said to us last night, for the president to ask a civilian servant, an FBI official, a nonpartisan person who they voted for, and that was followed up by criticizing him for his wife's political donations from Democrats that's affiliated to Clinton's. So I guess he could have just been making small talk, but those two things together certainly intimated to us that he was looking for some sense of how he felt politically.
How did Andrew McCabe take it?
Well, McCabe later told folks it was disturbing, and it kind of circulated through the FBI. Here was this conversation he had with the president. He went in, and the president asked a number of political questions. Several people in the FBI described it to my colleagues as, he was disturbed by the conversation.
And it was interesting to hear Andrew McCabe, as you report, say that he didn't vote.
Right.
Which, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's pretty normal. A lot of top FBI officials, just like many journalists who are involved in this world, don't cast ballots in presidential elections or are not affiliated with a party, just so you will not have those concerns of partisan political activity. As you know, when those concerns are there, it kind of taints the findings and it taints the work.
Yeah, I mean, so now we have learned, and we've heard from our legal experts today, that is customary, because if you're involved in an investigation, you don't want to be seen as partisan somehow, so you sit it out and you don't exercise your civil duty or your civil right. And did that satisfy the president when Andrew McCabe said he didn't vote?
Well, it's unclear. He brought him back in again for a perfunctory interview to become the permanent FBI director, and then obviously chose Chris Wray. Since then, the president has been in on a number of occasions to aides about the money that he took, about the fact that he thinks he's a Democrat. We've even seen him taunt Andrew McCabe on Twitter on several occasions. So Andrew McCabe is far from the president's favorite person, and I don't think his answers must have satisfied him if all of the president's subsequent comments are an indicator of that.
Let's talk about your other reporting that CNN has matched, that Robert Mueller is preparing, getting ready to interview President Trump and vice versa. Do you have any sense of what that will look like? Is that a sit down in person? Is that a submission of written questions and answers?
Well, the negotiations are apace now. President Trump's lawyers are obviously, looking to make an interview as accommodating to him as possible, whether it is some written answers, whether part of it is videotaped. What Bob Mueller's team has told the president's lawyers, though, are they're interested particularly in two parts: the firing of Mike Flynn early in the administration and the firing of James Comey later in the administration. Those are kind of the bucket areas and what the president was thinking, the preceding events, what happened afterwards, basically what precipitated the president to take both of these moves. And so the negotiations are beginning now. His lawyers are obviously going to the president and saying, here's what we want, and Mueller's team saying, here's what we want, and we expect this to happen, sometime in the coming months.
So coming months, not a couple of weeks.
Well, it depends. I mean, these negotiations could go well. I think the President Trump's lawyers are expecting to start talking to Mueller's team as early as next week. And then it depends how they go. They could, in a few days figure it out, or it could take some time.
Okay, Josh Dawsey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you.
Joining us now are former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti and CNN political analyst David Gregory. Renato.
We are learning that special counsel Robert Mueller wants to interview President Trump and that could happen within the next few weeks. What does all of this mean for Republicans in the 2018 midterms? Let's bring in RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. What a beautiful studio.
Thank you. We are quite proud of it.
It's gorgeous. I've never been here, so thrilled.
We'll come back anytime.
Thank you.
Let's start with the Russia investigation.
Okay.
Should President Trump sit down for a face-to-face interview with Robert Mueller?
Well, the Trump administration has cooperated fully with the Mueller investigation. His attorneys have cooperated. It's not for me to say what the president should do. I think he should take the advice of his counsel, and we'll go from there.
Do you think that President Trump should have asked the acting FBI director, Andrew McCabe, who he voted for in 2016?
Yeah, I know this is a big story. I think it's just a conversation. I don't think it intends, all these terrible things that people are trying to put forward.
But was it inappropriate?
I don't know. I ask people who they vote for sometimes. I think it's just trying to get to know somebody. I don't think the intentions are as bad as they're being put out.
You don't think it's that President Trump thinks that if anybody voted for a Democrat, they cannot do their jobs impartially?
Think so. I really don't think so. He's certainly not going around to every single FBI agent and saying, did you vote for me? It's a conversation. He had someone in his office. He kept people on who I know, I'm sure he thinks didn't support him. I mean, this is a president who's just getting to know people, and that's part of those conversations.
He was just being conversational.
Yeah, I think so.
About the FBI.
Yeah.
Do you think the Americans should trust the FBI?
I do. I think we should trust the FBI. I think it's very concerning what's happening with Lisa Page and Peter Strzok and these 5 months of missing text messages we've seen. And the text messages we have seen are concerning. When you see that they knew about the outcome of the Hillary Clinton investigation before it was released, when they knew...
I mean, it's hard to parse these things from text messages.
But
it's hard to know what these mean.
But they did have one where they said, and I read them through last night, where they said Hillary Clinton had sent an email through her server to the president. And then they changed the language. They didn't want to put the president there. Then they said somebody with high security. And then it ended up not being in the Comey conclusion. I think that's concerning. These are things we should get to the bottom of. We know that our FBI men and women are serving this country with distinction. But these two individuals need to be investigated. They have gone outside of the lane, and they've been inappropriate.
Understood. They've also been reassigned. So do these two taint the work of the FBI?
No, but they taint their own work. And I think we need to get to the bottom of these 5 months of missing text messages that occurred during a very difficult time, during the transition, during when Susan Rice unmasked the names from the FISA warrants. We need to know what they knew. Which we need to know what happened during that time. I mean, why are these 5 months of text messages missing? So it warrants an investigation.
But when the president puts out a tweet like this one, after years of Comey with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation and more, running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters, worst in history. But fear not, we will bring it back to greatness. Do you think that that has a demoralizing effect on the rank and file in the FBI?
I think Comey deserved to be fired, especially now that we've known things that he did when he was the head of the FBI. Listen, this is up to the president to decide. This is up for the voters to decide. I think there are some concerning things coming out, especially from these text messages, and they need to be investigated.
But this is what's so confusing. This is our top law enforcement agency, okay? They keep us safe. They fight crime. They fight terrorism. So do we trust them or do we not trust them? Are they in tatters?
We do trust them, but these two individuals need to be investigated.
Fine, and nobody's disagreeing with that.
But they're hurting the FBI in some ways, because these are people working for the government talking about how they don't like the president, how they want to come after him, how they're going to be safeguards against him. That's concerning. They should not have been doing that as FBI agents. And like you said, they just got reassigned.
Sure.
They should be let go based on that, because they're supposed to be. I mean, we talk about the president.
But I just want to get through the whole. So do these two taint the whole FBI as the president seems to be?
No, of course not. But why is everybody not willing to say they should be investigated? That's what I'm saying. Where are the Democrats saying? But where are the Democrats saying this is wrong, what they've done? This is out of line. These two individuals, but two individuals do not taint a whole body. And the president has said that. He's gone and spoken to the FBI, but these individuals have gone out of line, and they should be investigated. I think they should be removed.
Are you hearing any Democrats say, 5 months of missing texts, who cares?
I'm not hearing Democrats saying 5 months of missing texts, let's investigate. We should all be saying that. This is truly concerning to have these people at the heart of this investigation, the Mueller investigation, one of them, exchanging texts saying how much they don't like the president of the United States, purely partisan, talking about investigations to each other. We need to figure out what happened.
Okay, let's talk about what's going to happen with the Dreamers. What's the RNC's position on what should happen to these 800,000 people?
Well, it's going to be up to the president and the legislature.
Do you understand what the president's position is?
I do.
On the Dreamers?
The president's been really clear. He said we want to deal with DACA.
No, but
it's got to be
just on the Dreamers. Just focus on the Dreamers.
No, but it's not just the Dreamers. That's the thing. It's not just a one thing. It's got to be DACA, chain migration, the visa lottery, and border security for a lot of reasons. And the border security is important because we don't want to find ourselves in this exact same position 20 years from now.
But it's hard to know what the president feels about the Dreamers.
He's been so clear.
Has he? Does he want them to become, does he want a path to citizenship or does he want legalization?
He said, I want to deal with DACA, but it has to deal with border immigration. Come to me. What
are the details of what he wants for the Dreamers?
Because it's up to Congress to make those decisions. And that's why he said, President Obama, and the court said it, the Fifth Circuit said, he used executive order incorrectly, unconstitutionally. It needs to be codified by Congress. Let them work a deal, bring it, and I'll tell you what I'll sign.
But the problem is that we don't know his position. We don't know how he feels about this. Even Mick Mulvaney said yesterday, it depends on what they present us with. Well, but is that his inner feeling? I mean, his sort of moral compass about the Dreamers is, let me see what kind of deal I can get.
I think he's putting it right in the body it should be, which is Congress. They need to come up with their solution and come together and present it to him. And he's going to work every step of the way. He's been willing to do that. There's been a willingness on the part of Republicans to work with Democrats on DACA, but it has to include border security, visa lottery, and chain migration.
Let's talk about 2018.
Yeah.
I have one specific question for you about 2018 involving one Republican candidate, Congressman Patrick Meehan. What's going to happen with him? As you know, he was tossed off of the Ethics Committee because he was having an affair with a staffer. He used office funds to pay her. He says that he's not going anywhere. Does the RNC stand behind Congressman Meehan?
Well, there's an investigation going on there as well. We'll get to the bottom of that. I mean, I need to see more details on that. He's been removed, and Paul Ryan's handling that. Listen, I'm going to be out there working to keep majorities in the Senate and the House. I know that our country's in a better place under President Trump and Republican leadership than it was. Let's look at the great news about Disney yesterday with bonuses, Verizon. All these good things are happening in our country. 17-year low unemployment. Jobs are coming back. Things are good. I want to keep those majorities, and we'll let the voters make decisions as to who's best to represent them.
But right now, does the RNC stand behind Congressman Meehan?
Right now, we're going to let the investigations take place. We'll see everything that happened through the ethics investigation, and then we'll let the voters decide, and it's too early to say.
So that's a yes?
No, I'm saying let the process play out. I'm not going to.
So you don't know how you finish it?
Yeah. I have to know all the details. I have to know all the details.
But you haven't heard enough yet that he used office funds to pay for.
I want to see an investigation, and I want to hear it from the House, and I think Paul Ryan's got a handle on that.
Ronna McDaniel.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much for being here in person. Chris.
All right, sources tell CNN Special Counsel Bob Mueller does want to talk to the president, and soon. What does that say about where we are in the investigation? We ask former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. Next.
So the Washington Post is reporting that President Trump pointedly asked acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe in an Oval Office meeting who McCabe voted for in the 2016 election. Officials say that McCabe told the president he did not vote, but he found that conversation disturbing. So this conversation happened shortly after the president fired James Comey. Back with us now, John Avlon and Michael Zeldin. So, Michael, is that out of bounds? Is it illegal to ask the acting FBI director who he voted for?
Well, I don't know if it's illegal. It certainly is inappropriate, and it follows a pattern of behavior by the White House in respect of its conversations with the FBI, whether it's the loyalty oath, the meeting in the Oval Office, the first responders meeting, all of those types of communications between the White House and the FBI director, and this time McCabe is acting FBI director, seems to be inappropriate in respect of the White House keeping its distance from the FBI to make sure that they act independently of any political pressure. And this is what, to Chris's point in the setup, this is what has been the problem with the president all along, and is what has created, if you will, this obstruction of justice investigation for him. He keeps making mistakes along these lines, which is further evidence for Mueller to look at whether or not he has the intent to interfere with this investigation.
Now, what do you think about the political pushback from the other side on this? Whether it's the FISA memo, release it, no release it, all the hype and intrigue around that, the missing texts between Strzok and Lisa Page, and this overall narrative that the FBI is dirty. I don't think the president can every once in a while back off that, but Raj Shah put out a statement right after the president said everything's fine at the FBI, saying it's toxic in all its senior leadership. What do you think of that pushback campaign by the right?
What's toxic is the environment that's been created by the president in politicizing and demonizing law enforcement.
It's not just him, though. Hold on. Lots of help.
No, that's exactly right. But remember, tone comes from the top. And conservatives and Republicans have always prided themselves on being the party of law and order, that they've got law enforcement's back. And so it's absolutely extraordinary to see that narrative and that instinctive loyalty get shifted on a dime in defense of a president who's seeking to protect himself from law enforcement inquiries. And so the fact that the conservatives on the Hill and folks on talking heads on TV are going after and questioning not just the integrity of the FBI and law enforcement, but really, in some cases, comparing them to the KGB is an utter reversal of their alleged longstanding belief. And it shows the corrupting influence of the Trump campaign and the Trump administration on the conservative movement and Republicans on Capitol Hill. It's a character test, and almost all of them are failing.
It was really interesting, Michael, yesterday in the press room, Sarah Sanders was asked, if the president thinks this is a witch hunt, why doesn't he just fire Bob Mueller? Well, why doesn't he just get it over with, put everybody out of their misery?
Fox asked that question. No small measure of irony there.
It's interesting how she explained it. Listen to this.
Why doesn't the president just get rid of Bob Mueller? Just fire him. Mr. Gidley also said today that it's wasting taxpayers' money. In that regard, why doesn't he just end the investigation? Because it's wasting the taxpayers' money.
Look, we want to see this come to a complete and full conclusion. I think we all know what everybody in this room would do if the president did that, and I don't think that's helpful to the process.
What did you think of that, Michael? It's because reporters, there'd be hue and cry from journalists.
Yeah. Well, it's naive, maybe at best. The reality is, and we can ask John Dean how well it worked out for President Nixon when he fired Archibald Cox. It's not the end of an investigation when you get rid of the lead investigator. A second one comes on, and the investigation continues with a new aspect to it, which is, why was the first guy fired? So it's just silly talk on her part to say that the press is what's driving the decision not to fire Mueller. What has to drive the decision not to fire Mueller is an obstruction of justice inquiry by the special counsel's office. It's simple as that.
That's true, but she also told the truth for a second, and that the press is playing a constraining role in holding the president accountable from some of his worst impulses, potentially, because of the blowback, that we do play a role in the process. But the other point is that if that's the only thing holding back the dam, then also members of Congress who are going to pass a law to constrain Trump's ability to fire Mueller should probably giddy up on that as well. Because if it's just about good faith, let's not assume there's a large reservoir of that.
Anytime you can sneak in a giddy-up reference is a good day here.
That's what I do.
John Avlon, Michael Zeldin, thank you.
And what we see is that this toxic environment of left versus right bleeds into everything. Look at the immigration negotiation that only has 16 days. Very rocky start. Senator Chuck Schumer says, hey, the wall funding that was on the table, now off the table. The president, of course, responded in kind, saying no wall, no DACA. Where does that leave us? Next. Negotiations on immigration have a very short window, and they're not off to a good start. Why? Well, Senator Chuck Schumer started first saying, hey, this offer to fund the wall is off the table. The president fired back with this tweet, crying Chuck Schumer fully understands, especially after his humiliating defeat, that if there is no wall, there is no DACA. We must have safety and security together with a strong military for our great people. Here to unpack all this, John Avlon and CNN political commentator Errol Lewis. Is this a typical just beginning of negotiations, or are we off to a bad start?
I think we're off to a pretty bad start. It's hard to imagine why this would be better than the many attempts over the last decade to try and resolve a lot of these very difficult issues. I mean, DACA itself, you have to remember, is sort of a workaround, right? I mean, it's an attempt to sort of make some unintended consequences of our immigration policy rational and humane and fair. And to sort of see it get off to this start with like the name calling, the childishness, the tweets, it's hard to imagine that they're going to get this done by February.
I'm confused. Is it shut down Schumer or Kranjca? Which one?
I think you got to pick one nickname and stick with it.
It also depends
Ryan
if
is
you're
John
a
Boehner.
politician or a Russian bot.
Right.
Bots like the hashtag.
But I'm also confused about this. Why did Chuck Schumer offer to pay for the wall? That was the confusing part, that was some other different negotiation. It makes more sense that he's back to his original position, doesn't it?
Well, it was in the context of a negotiation to try to get something done to either avert the shutdown or stop the shutdown. But, Errol's using words I don't understand, like rational and fair and humane and immigration policy, which really haven't been in the part of the conversation in our country for some time, certainly not in this era. Look, Schumer's going to withdraw that offer in the context of the start of negotiations. But let's not be too cute or histrionic about this, because there is a 3-week window on this. And so it's going to require everyone summon their better angels, and it's going to require the broad outlines of a deal that look a lot like what were brought to the table 3 weeks ago before it was blown up by the president.
You mean the Graham-Durbin deal?
Yeah, some version of that is what's going to end up happening, if anything happens at all. It's going to be border security, including building a wall and portions. It's going to be a DACA deal that probably at least gives legal status to the Dreamers, if not full citizenship. It's going to be some compromise on chain migration.
You're talking about the pillars, because obviously the White House had said that deal is dead, but it was because the matter of degree, not the boxes.
It's also because Lindsey Graham's going after Stephen Miller and his bad blood.
I mean, look, Errol, the problem for Schumer is that deal means more to the Democrats than it does to the Republicans. How do we know that? Well, we know that because he offered the wall. And that is a big give because it's a silly give and they're not getting anything back for it. We also know, if you've ever read Chester L. Karras on negotiation, if somebody offers something once, they'll offer it again.
Of course.
So it's not the strongest move. But also, we know that this Bill of Love stuff from the president is just talk. How do we know? Listen to what Mick Mulvaney, budget director, certainly knows the heart and mind of the president on this issue. Listen to what he said on this show. Just say what his position is on it. How do they get to stay? Who gets to stay?
Again, depends on what we get in exchange. What do we get for border security? What do we get for wall?
Love has no strings attached. It's not about a bill of love.
Are we going Corinthians now?
It's about love is brave, love is kind. Only at weddings do you hear that.
It turns out love is a pretty good bargaining chip, right? I mean, they like the idea because it is popular, right? Because 90-something% of the public wants to see some kind of decent resolution for the Dreamers. Well, fine. He wants to then trade it for the wall or something else, or for changing legal migration and for all kinds of other things.
But then he shouldn't get any credit for having compassion towards the Dreamers, because he doesn't.
No, that's
right. If you cared about them, you'd help them, period, and then you negotiate these other things for a flawed system. Well, that's not what's happening.
Well, it's important to note, though, I mean, how far Schumer might be able to go. I mean, somebody like Luis Gutierrez says, you know what? Build the wall. Just save our Dreamers. If there are a lot of people who feel that way in the Democratic base, and, building a wall amounts to a couple of $2 billion a year for 10 years to enact a policy that many Democrats feel is never going to work anyway. It might be
a big win for Trump, though, for the campaign. If he says he got the wall, it's a big deal.
Yeah, but again, at some point, you got to start governing and thinking about the national interest. Both parties have to look out of their base. But if any deal gets done, elements of the base on both sides are going to be angry. That's how you know a real deal got done.
John Avlon, Errol Lewis, thank you.
All right, so it is important at the end of the day to track everything that has happened and why our heads are shaking so much. So tonight in prime time, we'll dig into these topics. We will try to get people close to the president to understand where his head is and where we go next, 9 p.m. Eastern.
Sometimes heads shake also after that.
Sometimes. Not mine. Mine just kind of lolls back and I fall asleep in the car.
Nods off. All right, meanwhile, we have to get to this story. Police in Kentucky are trying to determine why a teenager opened fire at a high school, killing 2 classmates and wounding more than a dozen others. The latest...
All right, there is no question there is a Republican-led push to release a memo spearheaded by Republicans in the House Intelligence Committee. The chair there, Devin Nunes, had his staff put together a memo that alleges FBI abuses of surveillance laws. Sources say President Trump is inclined to allow that memo to be made public, but Democrats are against the move. Now, that shouldn't matter if the president wants to declassify something. There are plenty of other ways to get in the record. So let's discuss. We have CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero and CNN law enforcement analyst and retired FBI supervisory special agent James Gagliano. You have just the other day. So let's discuss this. First, in terms of the legalities of this, Counselor, am I right? If they wanted to declassify this, the executive branch, the president, is ultimate power of classifying and declassifying, and Congress members have immunity for any speech or debate on the floor of Congress, so they could go on there and read the memo and put whatever they want into the congressional record. Carrie, that's you. I never call gags counsel.
Sure, got it. Got it. Certainly, the president is the ultimate classification authority. He has the authority to declassify information. But let's be clear, Chris, this is not the way that intelligence oversight is normally conducted. There are times when members of the intelligence committees, whether it's in the House or the Senate, don't like what they're seeing, have concerns about what information they are receiving or they're being briefed on from the intelligence community. There is then a process that they go through where they would let the Department of Justice usually and the intelligence community, that means the Director of National Intelligence or the agency where the information originates, know what they want declassified, and then there is a process that has gone through, and ultimately that could go up to the president, although that's very unusual and usually not necessary.
Right. No, I totally hear you. I'm just saying in this environment, they keep saying the IC's dirty. Right? That's part of the theory of the case. So if they want to go around it, they won't even show the FBI the memo. Still let them assess what's in it and see if any action is necessary. So I'm saying they could find their own ways. Now, Jimmy, you are a fair broker on the FBI, and people should know that. You were there, you're an alumnus, but you're very hard line in terms of law and order and doing the investigation. In fact, you think a special prosecutor is needed to see what was done in the FBI with respect to these political investigations. But not showing the FBI the memo. What does that mean to you? Why does this memo about FISA practices matter? And what about that move, not even showing it to the DOJ?
It's perplexing and befuddling. And Chris, let's go inside the House Intelligence Committee. Let's look at what Devin Nunes and the members of the committee are looking at. Go back to April of 2016. That's when Fusion GPS was hired by the Hillary Clinton campaign. Yes, it had been started by the Washington Free Beacon on the conservative side, but that's when they took it over. The Democratic National Committee took it over. Fast forward now to June 27th, the infamous Phoenix tarmac meeting between
new prosecutor.
Extremely unusual. Now, with the released Strzok and Page texts that we do have, if you line them up with that chronology, it's troubling. The insurance policy was talked about in Andy McCabe's office. I've known Andy for 20 years. Andy's a good and decent man. But when you read these texts and how they line up, the secret society, that we can't let this happen. We've got to move to what we talked about in Andy's office. Those things are troubling. Now, when you look at the 5 months worth of missing texts, okay, we've got from December, which is the Trump transition team, he's elected in November, all the way to May. 5 months. That's at a particular period of time where the Russian collusion investigation, which had started out as a counterintelligence investigation, is heating up. Does it look bad? Absolutely. Walks like a duck, talks like a duck.
That's not the standard, because first of all, Hillary Clinton and her people made the same exact argument. They were putting together the same kind of timelines to say, look how they were out to get us in the email thing. And you need some proof. Even Ron Johnson, okay, Republican senator, certainly not looking to give a pass to anybody on the left, certainly named Clinton, he says there is no proof to back up these suggestions.
I agree. And if you read those text messages, we're doing it in a vacuum. We're not seeing context, and until you put them in front of Congress to testify under oath, we'll never know. But when you also look at the damning text about Loretta Lynch knowing beforehand, after James Comey came out and said she knew nothing about this, I've spoken to nobody at DOJ or at the White House. It's so damning, Chris, that I think there's enough smoke there that we need a set of independent eyes.
Right. But you also have to get deeper into, you're right, someone's going to have to assess it at some point. I don't know about a special prosecutor, because if you keep prosecuting political gripes, you know, you're going to wind up in a rabbit hole. But you got to look at what Lynch knew and what Comey was saying she didn't know, and you'll see a little bit more of a cross-threading. But I appreciate the candor. Carrie, appreciate the perspective. Thanks to both of you. Allison.
Okay, Chris, now to this story that we've been following. The NCAA is investigating Michigan State University for its role in the Larry Nassar sex abuse scandal. Nassar's sentencing hearing resumes in about 2 hours. 3 more victims will read impact statements. Then, the former USA Gymnastics and MSU doctor is expected to be sentenced for sexually assaulting more than 100 girls in his care. One of those young women will join us shortly, but first we want to go live to Lansing, Michigan, and bring in CNN's Jean Casares. What's the latest there, Jean?
Allison, 163 victim impact statements have been read in court. We believe one of the final young women this morning will be the victim who was the very first to come forward to the Indy Star in 2016, saying she was assaulted by Larry Nassar, and that allowed so many other young women to come forward saying, "Me too."
I am not weak, and I will not accept those feelings of embarrassment or shame. I'm leaving those here with him.
Defiant and emboldened, the victims of gymnastic Dr. Larry Nassar coming forward, many confronting their abuser directly, including 18-year-old Emily Morales.
I want you to look at me. I believe in forgiveness, Larry. You and I are human beings. We make mistakes. Although you have hurt me, I want to forgive you and feel closure and move on to healing in my life. I want you to apologize to me right here. I want to forgive you, but I also want to hear you tell me that you forgot all the hurt you caused. Thank you.
New mother Breon Randall traveled from Seattle to tell her story of being ignored by authorities after she reported Nassar's abuse in 2004.
Do I look familiar to you? Do you recognize my name? The police questioned you, and you had the audacity to tell them I had misunderstood this treatment because I was not comfortable with my body. How dare you? Sadly, they took your word instead of mine. I am here today to tell you I wasn't afraid of you then, and I'm sure as hell not afraid of you now.
Randall's travel expenses were paid for by the same police department that dismissed her claims over 10 years ago. The NCAA now investigating Michigan State University, where Nassar was employed for nearly 2 decades.
By standing by and sweeping it under the rug, you are just as disgusting. If it had been your own daughters, would you still have remained silent?
To MSU, USAG, and whoever else is responsible for creating an environment in which this monster had unsupervised, uninterrupted, unprecedented access to hundreds of victims, you should have prevented this.
The MSU Faculty Senate held an emergency meeting yesterday on the question of whether there should be a vote of no confidence taken on MSU's president. Today, all 2,200 faculty members will be sent an email to weigh in on whether that vote of no confidence should take place. Allison?
And I do want to get into that with our next guest, Jean. Thank you very much. Joining us now is Larissa Boyce. She's a former Michigan State University gymnast and one of the women who gave a victim's impact statement in court. Larissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let me play. You said something very interesting in your victim impact statement, so let me just play a portion of this for our viewers.
The disturbing truth is, you could have been stopped back in 1997. You and Kathy silenced me. You took away my confidence, you took away my innocence, and you took away my voice. But today is a new day. Today, I am claiming my freedom from you.
Larissa, what you're talking about there is you were, as far as we know, the first person to come forward and tell somebody about what Nassar was doing in 1997. And the Kathy that you spoke of there was the MSU gymnastics coach. What did she say to you when you came forward? What did she do?
She said that I must be misunderstanding a medical technique that she had been friends with Nassar for years and years, and he would never, ever do anything inappropriate. She led me through basically an interrogation and had other gymnasts come into the room and asked them in front of me if they had ever been uncomfortable with Nassar's treatments. And all of them but one other girl said no. So there were two of us that night that said he was what he was doing to us, and that it made us feel uncomfortable. And she, instead of notifying authorities or even my parents, she sat there and told me, well, I can file this, but there's going to be very serious consequences for both you and Dr. Nassar if I do this.
Oh my gosh. And now, when you see what's happening in court, when you listen to these other roughly 150 young women, girls who've come after you, what goes through your head?
It didn't have to be this way. He could have been stopped back then. They could have all been spared from this pain. So it is heartbreaking, maddening, frustrating. I think there's not enough words that can describe how it makes me feel, knowing it could have been prevented.
You asked the MSU president, Luann Simon, to attend the sentencing hearing, to see with her own eyes what was happening there and to hear these survivor stories. What did she tell you?
She said she didn't have time in her schedule to come and watch me. And I just asked for me personally. She said she didn't have time, and why don't we make a compromise? I'll watch the live stream. So.
And should she keep her job?
At this point, I don't think so. She has not shown leadership in this prolific, this is the most prolific sex abuse scandal, I think, ever in our history. And instead of being there and showing that she's compassionate and cares, I mean, she should be there every day listening to every girl that goes through to really grab the scope of this whole thing. But instead of doing that, she has shown that she's tone deaf. They keep saying that they are,
well, sort of troubling. I mean,
even though he could declassify it himself,
he could,
he has the power to do that,
and possibly will. And